Hello and welcome from wherever you're listening from today. In this episode, I'm talking with Dr. Eleanor Dare, an academic and critical technologist who's worked with Cambridge Digital Humanities on the AI Forensics project. Eleanor's research explores games and world building, critical AI and VR, and includes publications about computation, AI, education, and digital interaction with publishers including MIT's Leonardo, ACM Interactions, Routledge, Sage, and Intellect Books. Today we talk a lot about power, what power does to people, and the type of people that gravitate towards it. We talk about how to interrogate image datasets that are impossibly huge to navigate, and what are the creative strategies to understand those. And we talk about deskilling and the impacts of ChatGPT in areas like education and learning. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. I really enjoyed recording it. And as always, we start by thinking about what digital fatalism might mean.
I deliberately didn't look it up, so I'm prepared to be told that it's a big theory that I've never heard of and I'm completely ignorant. But I didn't want to look it up because I wanted to see what my own construction of that would be. So I've thought about it a bit, and I realised that what I would see as digital fatalism is a pervasive determinism around technology, which is extremely hard to budge people out from thinking that what technology companies want is inevitable, and that we are powerless to stop the almost natural, almost Darwinian trajectory of those technologies. And that's neoliberalism, essentially. So I would see it as inseparable from neoliberalism, and wider still, inseparable from colonialism. And wider still, inseparable from racialization, which enabled slavery.
And so, and this might be, I mean, maybe this kind of like ties into your answer there, because I'm interested in thinking about how ideology is circulated and produced by current digital technology. And I don't know whether you have any thoughts on how digital fatalism might be different from pre-digital fatalism.
Yes, yeah, that's interesting to think of pre-digital fatalism. I mean, I think we can connect it to the sort of religious trajectories that which are entangled with the divine rights of kings, the divine rights of the Pope, the divine inevitability of power. So I think it's way probably pre-medieval, religious, goes back to the Crusades. And that's why, my speciality is AI. I see it as particularly regressive in its return to crusading tropes of domination. Syed Mustafa Ali is particularly good on pointing that out, and the apocalypticism of the AI, AI existential risk is essentially a Judeo-Christian return to messianic religious beliefs, which points to the deep, deep conservatism we're dealing with technologies. So I think it's been there, for a really long time. I'm not an expert outside of the digital constructs of fatalism, but I see the echoes of sort of religiosity and colonialism there. I'm not interested in individualistic framings around technology. I see technologies, as digital technologies, as part of huge systemic colonialized power structures. I think it can be used as a kind of a smokescreen to hide the reality of the power behind technologies, as if it has anything to do with self-expression or self-realization. It has nothing to do with that, any more than mining coal does. So, for example, a miner might say that they love working really long hours in a coal mine because it's their self-expression and it helps in their identity formation. The company owner doesn't give a flying fuck. So I don't think, no, that's a whole separate thing.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what you said there. Could we talk a little bit about your background? Because, it's really, I think it's really interesting combination of having like computing expertise and computer science and also arts and a creative practice.
Yeah, thank you. So I started off as a fine artist, believing probably somewhat neoliberalised construct of self-expression, but then interested in the political possibility of art, and involved in the 80s in little zines like Shocking Pink, a little bit involved in Spare Rib and those traditions of using mark making to agitate, to cause trouble, which really excites me. But then I got sucked into these schemes to destroy art by making everybody into a coder or into a digital person, particularly aimed at women in the 1990s Tony Blair initiative. And I didn't realize it was that. I thought it was just because they wanted an amazing workforce of really capable, powerful people who could use technology. So I got really sidetracked, unfortunately, into the dreary bullshit world of computer science and masculine posing and delusions of adequacy and certainty that not only could they code, but they therefore knew about everything else, including education, psychology, finances, anything they laid their hands to, those men could rule. I see echoes of that dreary certainty around their omniscience, of course, in people like Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, who think they're the masters of the universe, and of course can take over education, indeed are dismantling it right now in America. So it took me, I encountered extreme distaste right from the word go, but thought if I was a really good girl, I could focus really hard and get really good at it. And then I might even get a tiny bit of respect, perhaps. That was stupid of me. Then I sort of suddenly connected what was going on and realised that largely it's still about colonial domination, and the drive to get women into computing was about fear of Chinese domination of all things science and technology, and it was part of the Cold War. And indeed, the Americans had something called the Americans Compete Act, I think it was 1997, which overtly says that STEM education and all that dreary bullshit is the solution for propping up America's dominance of the world. And of course, England, being completely insignificant, goes along with it, whatever they tell us to do, because Bush and Blair were best friends at that point. So it's all part of a really disappointingly horrible sort of trend in history in the West.
I'm sort of thinking, so then do you have like quite a cynical view on kind of like the push towards like inclusion and stuff, of it being like actually included in what? Like who's people inviting in?
Absolutely. And all this sort of digital divide and digital inequality. I was talking to somebody in a talk I was doing about ChatGPT and education, and they said, but won't our kids be left out if they're not educated with this? It was from a country in Asia, a developing nation. And I said, I sincerely believe the children who are not exposed to the deskilling drivel of ChatGPT will be advantaged by their lack of exposure to this crappy substandard idea of what knowledge consists of. They'll be the ones who can actually read and write and string sentences together and make meaning for themselves.
I mean, I came across a really interesting study recently. It was actually done by Microsoft, I think, and it was like, it was around, it was really scrutinizing the kind of increasing productivity claims that a lot of these companies have. And it was like, they even found that it like reduced the critical thinking of their workers.
Even people like Gates don't allow their children. I read that these people don't allow their children to have the bullshit technologies they generate because they know that it's dribbling bullshit and will rot their minds. There was a good piece posted by Ben Patrick Williamson about the illusion that generative AI frees up teachers' time. They spend an awful lot of time mopping up the crap that generative AI generates. So it actually doesn't. Who wants to be efficient anyway? I don't give the flying fuck about being efficient or productive. I'm quite productive enough. Working week is hideous. I don't want to be more productive. I read, papers about how artists want to be more productive and more efficient. Utter drivelling shit. Where do they get this crap from? And again, it's a computer scientist who's seen a bit of surrealist art and thinks, wow, I know everything now, and now I know what artists want. Apart from the crazy world of dreams being made into realist paintings, there is, of course, the desire to be more productive and efficient. What else could it be about other than my corporate programming, under the sort of corporate ideology that swamps every corner, particularly of the United Kingdom, which I know best to speak to, which infests everything we do.
And it also seems that we've witnessed and observed and kind of seen this in play of this hierarchy of like knowledge around computer science, and like you're talking about like the certainty of like this kind of just like arrogance.
Yeah, I mean, computer scientists are amongst the thickest human beings I've ever unfortunately come across. But with it comes a the sort of benighted certainty of their excellence in everything. They have no insight into the dreariness of their crappy chump chop understandings, and therefore no wonder they think that generative AI is amazing, because its average crappiness is for them a huge achievement. And fair enough, it is for them. It would be a huge achievement to write a sentence using ChatGPT for people who can barely string a sentence together, and actually will say things to me like, why can't we write essays in bullet points?
Could we talk about your project, AI Forensics? Yeah, could you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's paid for by the Volkswagen Foundation. Very generous of them. It's about it's a big project. It's got lots of different people doing lots of different things. So I don't speak for the project. I just speak for my branch of it, which is looking at the very large image data sets which underpin things like DALL-E and all that mid-journey crap, generative AI, image generating systems. They rely upon unimaginably vast amounts of innovative theft. That's the amazing innovation, is the theft. No one ever thought to steal on that scale before. It's really impressive. It's a massive breakthrough in technology. You can just steal whatever you want and trample over all rights that previously people thought were a sort of basis of civilized existence. So my job is to look at those data sets like Lion 5B, which has some billions of images in it as far as we know, and to try and understand what they contain and what are their sort of patterns. What can we do with them? So this is sort of quite murky. We don't really know exactly how these systems work, because they're not, guess what? They're not a public good. They're not a charity. They're not designed like the NHS to help people. It's just a sort of wank knobbery of very powerful men who turn out to be despicable fascists. So it's not a public good, so they don't tell us what they're up to. So it takes, anyone who's interested, they have to do kind of detective work or invent new ways to try to understand. I mean, Jer Thorpe has famously said if you wanted to understand Line 5B, it would take you about 800 years to see every image for 1 second. So therefore a human or even a huge team of humans have no hope of auditing effectively. So to understand what's in those data sets, me, like other people, have had to come up with ways to understand them. And I think artists are amongst the most interesting and capable of originating meaningful ways to understand visual culture. And so I have tried a number of different arts approaches. I've also used the really dreary statistical approaches, which, guess what, show that they're racist systems predicated on reflecting dominant culture. What a surprise that was when Python told me that. Amazing. But, we knew that anyway, so it didn't really tell me anything new. But I've invented different ways, with usually co-designing with other people, ways to think about what's in them or to sample.
Yeah, could you go into a bit more detail? Because these data sets are so huge, and it's impossible to, or it's very, very difficult to download the image set on one computer. And, it's just, so these kind of technical barriers that we come across.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what are some of the creative strategies that you...
Yes, yeah. And in fact, Line 5B isn't a data set, it's a link to, and that's another way that the slippery bastards have wiggled out of all moral, ethical or legal responsibility, as they say, we're only pointing to the child porn, we didn't actually download it. Which was morally virtuous. Of course it is, isn't it? If you point to a crime and do nothing, you're in a great position as a human being. So that's what they do, they're linked. So how do we do it? So first of all, I started off with the dreary statistical approaches, and guess what? They didn't tell me anything I didn't know already, is that they're run by bastards and it's for bastards, and it replicates most average, awful crap. So that was no surprise to me. So then I ran a series of workshops with students at Camberwell, students at University of Cambridge, and various open workshops that I've done. Two main themes. One was world building, and one was listening to images after the great academic of photography, Tina Camp. She wrote a brilliant book called Listening to Images in 2017 about ID photographs, pre-digital, but I thought her approaches were really interesting, away from statistical approaches, which I find hugely problematic anyway, to really trying to grasp moments of not resistance, but of refusal, is what Tina Camp would call this, refusal to these systems, categorization systems. So world building came about because one of the remits of forensic AI forensics project was benchmarking, which is a really boring term, comes from computer scientists to give them the illusion that they do a thorough job. When, of course, we know that computer scientists and developers generally do a really bad job to try and get technology out as quickly as possible, move fast and break things, whether that's people or societies or financial structures, who cares? As long as you're a master of the universe. So benchmarks are this delusion of adequacy around these technologies. They say that they have benchmarks, but actually it turns out that they're cheating around those, and ChatGPT fails. Between 60 and 90% of its answers are absolute rubbish. That's because they fake these benchmarks and train the system against its own benchmarks, which is the utmost corruption, intellectual corruption around that system. So I thought about rethinking benchmarks. And so we started with acts of building our ideal machine, and what would that be? And I've done that workshop now with about 100 people, at least 100 people, and not one single person produced a machine for generating money. Not one single person, maybe one naughty boy who wanted attention. There was one in every cohort of MPhil students, produced a gun, for example. So the overwhelming drift of the people who I work with, that without being prompted by me, was that they wanted technology that could enable an equitable balance of existence without extracting from what they would say is nature, natural life, other animals, a way to exist in harmony, which is really, really interesting. That's the language that they would use. And it made me sort of begin to think that the industrialized, corporatized benchmarks are very much out of sync against the neoliberal idea that we all are exactly the same as Google, and all anyone wants when they're born, or their first scream out of their mother's womb, is to be a very, very rich multi-billionaire. What else could any human being want? Well, actually, it turns out, there are more important things than that. That's just for really inadequate people.
And when you started doing these workshops, did they take a while to warm up to the different possibilities that they could design, or or did they just get straight in there?
Some people got straight in there. It's an interesting question. I realised so there are whole swathes of people who are trained to have delusions of adequacy. When you confront them with the creative thing to do, they actually have no clue what to do, and they start looking things up on ChatGPT. And I get really cross. I say, you don't need ChatGPT to use Play-Doh to make a model of something you'd really like a machine to do for you in your life. So it takes a bit of scaffolding, I think, proper teachers call it, to get there. And again, my belief in the value of an arts education is that people who have that intelligence and agility and quick thinking and belief in valuing their own intrinsic values are able to do that very well, very quickly, very, very with great insights, and that people with the STEM mentality are almost incapable of doing anything without blow-by-blow instructions. Very depressing. They're absolutely incapable of innovation, in my experience.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to reflect on how confidence kind of plays into this. I went to a workshop the other day, and it was about AI in schools. And the group of people, educators there, were talking about that they'd confronted some students around why have you used ChatGPT?
Yeah.
And one of the students had said, I just didn't think I didn't think I could ever be better than one of these.
I see that myself. So one of the unfortunate side effects of being immersed in digital culture, and computing and all that crap is a sort of increasing reliance upon it. And so I realised, despite doing a degree in painting and all the rest of it, and having briefly earned my living as a painter for a couple of years, I realised that I couldn't draw anymore. And then when I got really, really ill, I couldn't open my laptop. I couldn't face it. It made me feel sick just looking at it. So I started to draw with pencils, and I started to draw every single day. And I've kept it up for a really long time now. And I'm a student at the Royal Drawing School. And I realised that I'd been de-skilled by my reliance upon technology. And of course, that's its job, is to the job of these technologies, particularly generative AI, is to de-skill, make you dependent, make you thick as shit as quickly as possible, and make you incapable of any kind of self-initiative or origination, and make you think that dreary rubbish is really amazing. And that works very quickly. It's frighteningly fast how I see students to be dependent upon that. And when our colleagues reinforce that, I just think they should be thrown out of work as quickly as possible. Sacked. I would sack them, telling students to use ChatGPT.
Going back to that, your process of like the world building and the games design, I'm wondering whether like that as a process as well is maybe, I mean, you said a little bit about it's creating like kind of spaces for refusal. And so that is an example of finding ways through this craziness.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's slowing down and a stopping and a sort of sanity check. It really depresses me that students, I know it's not all students, but many students I've taught and colleagues. I mean, colleagues are the worst in higher education and senior management. Higher you go in management, the more thick they are, and generally too lazy to check on the reality of anything. So they love instant solutions, and they love anything that can get rid of the horrible staff that they clearly hate so much. But students, their belief in companies really appalls me. And I suppose it was Thatcherite, the legacy of Thatcher, that the businessman, that she takes the model of the small entrepreneur, but really they mean the colonial oligarch or money laundering oligarch is really who they mean. And the idea that people would trust Steve Jobs, I sometimes as a teacher have to stop myself being sick or heaving when people talk about these arseholes as if they're great men, better than, I don't know who's a great person, but better than somebody who actually gives a flying fuck about humanity and precious life on Earth. So I feel part of my job is to absolutely rip that apart, even if it makes me look like a sort of somebody who doesn't really respect business very much. Steve Jobs, one of the things he oversaw was lying about e-waste. Apple has really crappy design values, as far as I can see. They're famous for their patent for a car in which everyone would wear a VR headset and there would be no windows. Wow, wouldn't that be amazing? But of course, the more serious things, the exploitation of workers, built-in obsolescence, their absolute disregard for the environment, their disregard for workers' rights, their colonial crushing, which is epitomised by that stupid advert where the machine crushes violins and paints and musical, and crushes culture, converges it, flattens it into an iPad. That's what we're dealing with. That's the people we're dealing with.
How kind of optimistic or pessimistic are you in terms of challenging that? Does it come from the people? Does it come from like uprisings, or does it come from, what do you think in terms of regulation and policy, that kind of perspective?
Yeah, we're not going to get it from the top down. I don't see no evidence, even those of us who voted for Keir Starmer and then realised one of the first things he's mitigated for was little Tony Blair whispering in his ear about how great a chatbot would be as replacing teachers. That's really great, Tony, because your son runs an AI education company. Nice. There's a word for that, don't you? It begins with C. So this corruption, and then the AI guy that is it Care? He's a venture capitalist. You can't trust a venture capitalist. You wouldn't trust a venture capitalist to piss on you if you were on fire, unless they could make money from it. So Starmer has shown a really alarming lack of intelligence. Obviously not as bad as Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. Nobody's as bad as that. But really shocking to me, the lack of judgment. But you can see the little dollar signs in their eyes when these creepy American venture capitalists have told them that it's the solution because they could get rid of, they could make an enormous saving by sacking everyone in the civil service or every single teacher. It's because the snake oil people have come round. I mean, this is why I have absolutely zero respect for anyone of authority. It's only grown since the age of 5. It's just got worse year on year. Is that they are so susceptible to snake oil salesmen, where you or I, if we saw a man in a shiny suit offering us something extraordinary for a very, very low price, we'd know it was bullshit. But anyone above sort of professor upwards doesn't seem able to understand that. thing I most despise is the claim that ChatGPT is good for disability. I just think, how dare you go along? You run out of options and now you're saying it's good for disabled people who, let's face it, in higher education, which I know best, they despise anybody who isn't capable of the maximum amount of extraction. So disabled people are probably people they despise the most. So the idea that they give a flying fuck and that they're going to invest in technology for the sake of disability is their last-ditch, desperate effort to appear virtuous, because basically what they've been told by these snake oil pit salesmen is that they can sack the people who work hardest, who are on the lowest grade. And they're like, really? That sounds amazing, but maybe we could just say it's for disabled people or the environment. That's the other thing that I cannot stand, is the claim that AI, which is like throwing petrol into a fireplace on every second of your life, is somehow going to save the climate crisis. This is like a Goebbels level of lying, the opposite. And that's clearly their strategy. This is what they say. The opposite of the truth. So they will be saying that it's great for disabled people and it's really great for the environment.
This podcast has been supported by Northern Bridge Consortium, which is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council.